The elevator doors parted with a soft chime, revealing the heartbeat of the 23rd floor at Meridian Technologies. A blur of cubicles, fluorescent lights, and muted chatter stretched out before David Shin as he stepped into the chaos, not as the man who had once helmed the company, but as an outsider in his own kingdom. His fingers adjusted the stiff synthetic tie around his neck. Its cheap fibers a far cry from the silk Hermes he used to wear. The name tag, slightly crooked and faded, simply read, Dave, Temp Assistant. 15 years ago, David had been the one calling the shots, pacing boardrooms in tailored $1,000 suits and handcrafted Italian leather shoes. Now he stood invisible in secondhand sneakers, wearing a button-down that hung slightly off his frame. His outfit wasn't just a disguise, it was a shedding of pride, a necessary mask to uncover the truth he could no longer ignore. Meridian Technologies had once been his dream, born in a cluttered garage and sculpted into a Fortune 500 titan employing over 10,000 people. But growth, David had come to realize, didn't always mean progress, especially not in Seattle. It had been 3 weeks since that late-night meeting with his head of HR, a conversation that began with a simple question: why are employee satisfaction scores tanking in the Seattle branch? The Strategic Development Department, once a hub of innovation, had become a black hole of discontent. So David made the call, a secret descent into the trenches. "Can I help you?" A receptionist with glossy nails and a rehearsed smile glanced up from her screen. The way her eyes flicked over his outfit betrayed her silent judgment. "Hi, I'm Dave. I'm the new temp assistant for strategic development. I was told to check in with Marcus Holloway." David's voice lacked its usual authority. No boardroom command here, just a soft-spoken temp trying to sound useful. It felt disorienting. He had rehearsed this moment in the mirror, but reality had a way of stripping away confidence. The receptionist barely skimmed the forged documents from HR. "Corner office, 23rd floor, follow the cubicle maze, you'll know it. It's the only one with actual walls." He nodded with polite gratitude and stepped into the office labyrinth. The change in atmosphere was instant and visceral. The air was heavy with unspoken frustration. Heads down, shoulders tight, fingers flying across keyboards with the kind of urgency that didn't stem from inspiration, but from fear. No one smiled, no one looked up. It was as if the soul of the workplace had been slowly drained, leaving only the motions behind. He had visited this branch twice in 2 years. Both times were rehearsed events, PowerPoint symphonies played to impress. But now, walking in as Dave, he saw it raw, unfiltered, and it stung. "You must be the temp." The voice sliced through his thoughts. David turned to see Marcus Holloway approaching with the calculated swagger of a man who believed himself important. Slick hair, designer suit, smug confidence. Marcus looked like he belonged on a business magazine cover, but there was something brittle underneath the polish. "Yes, sir. I'm Dave, reporting for duty." David extended his hand. Marcus didn't take it. "Don't call me sir, I'm not that old. It's Mr. Holloway." His eyes scanned David from head to toe, pausing at the sneakers with visible disdain. "Did the agency not inform you about the dress code? This isn't a construction site." David swallowed the insult. "I apologize, Mr. Holloway. I dressed as professionally as I could afford." The lie was bitter, but necessary. Marcus scoffed. "Well, we'll make do," he said with a dramatic sigh, already turning toward his office. "Follow me. I hope you're better at following instructions than you are at dressing yourself. I don't have time to babysit another incompetent temp." David followed silently, absorbing every interaction like a sponge. As they passed workstations, he noticed how conversations faltered, eyes averted, backs straightened. It wasn't just respect, it was fear. Marcus moved like a storm cloud, and everyone had learned to brace themselves. "Here's your workspace," Marcus said, gesturing to a cramped desk wedged near his glass-walled office. It was barely larger than a cafeteria tray, positioned just right for Marcus to monitor him like a hawk. Your job is to make my life easier. Coffee, filing, phones, whatever I ask. Think you can manage that, Dave? Absolutely, Mr. Holloway. What kind of coffee do you prefer? Marcus gave a pleased smirk. Finally, a useful question. Italian espresso double shot, exactly 1 sugar cube, not granulated. Cubes. The machine's in the break room. It's temperamental, so figure it out. He checked his watch. Perfect timing. I've got a senior staff meeting in 10. They'll all want coffee. Get a tray. Don't screw this up. As David walked toward the break room, carrying the weight of the request like a stone, his thoughts spun. Never in all his years running the company had he asked an assistant to serve coffee. His assistants were trusted professionals, not errand runners. This wasn't about caffeine. It was a subtle power play, a test, a humiliation. The break room was dim and cramped, lit by flickering fluorescent tubes that made the stained countertops look even more neglected. The espresso machine looked like it had been dragged out of a junkyard. As David fiddled with the controls, a soft voice broke the silence. "You're the new temp?" He turned. A woman in her 50s stood by the microwave, eyes flicking toward the door to ensure they were alone. "That's me," David said, offering a genuine smile for the first time that day. "Dave?" "I'm Linda. Been in strategic development 12 years. Her tone was careful, but her eyes, they told stories of exhaustion, of years endured rather than enjoyed. And for the first time, David didn't feel like a CEO in hiding. He felt like a witness to something deeper than policy and numbers. Something broken. Linda hesitated for a second before leaning in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "A word of advice. Don't take anything Marcus says personally. He's difficult with support staff." "Difficult how?" David asked, keeping one eye on the hallway. Linda shot another cautious glance toward the break room door. "You're the 4th temp we've had in 2 months. The others didn't last long." That revelation hit David like a punch to the chest. HR had mentioned some turnover issues, but they had chalked it up to the job's fast-paced demands. Now, standing in this dim, flickering break room, he was beginning to realize it wasn't the workload that was chasing people away. It was something far more corrosive. "What happened to them?" he asked, feigning casual interest as he struggled with the espresso machine's steam wand. Linda sighed, the weight of her 12 years here settling into her shoulders. The first one quit after Marcus made her redo an entire filing project 3 times because the folders weren't aligned just right. The second? She got fired for incompetence after she asked why she had to work through her lunch break every day. And the third? She shook her head, lowering her voice even more. Marcus accused her of stealing office supplies. Security escorted her out like she was some kind of criminal. David paused mid-several press. Was she actually stealing? Intent to go unnoticed? Linda didn't answer. She didn't need to. The haunted look in her eyes said enough. But the moment was cut short by footsteps echoing in the hallway. Linda pivoted smoothly. "Here, press this button twice. Wait for the light to turn green. That's the trick." Her tone had shifted to a neutral, instructional calm, the survival instinct of someone used to playing it safe. David managed to churn out 5 cups of coffee. It wasn't Italian espresso by any stretch. It looked more like watery diner brew, but it would have to do. He added sugar cubes, cream, and napkins, arranging the tray with practiced care. Then, holding his breath, he headed for the conference room. Through the transparent walls, he could see Marcus at the head of the long table, speaking with exaggerated flair, while 4 other employees sat stiffly, like students enduring a lecture they couldn't escape. When David stepped inside, Marcus turned without missing a beat. Everyone, this is Dave, our new temp. Dave, these are the senior staff you'll be supporting. He didn't bother with names. Introductions were for people who mattered. David handed out the coffee silently, noting the subtle body language, tight smiles, downward glances, the kind of exhaustion that ran deeper than lack of sleep. These weren't lazy employees. These were professionals, worn thin by disrespect. Marcus took a sip, then grimaced. The espresso's weak. I asked for a double shot. Were you not listening? I apologize, Mr. Holloway. I'm still learning the machine, David replied calmly, swallowing the sting. See that you do. We can't have substandard service affecting our productivity. Just like that, he turned back to his audience, as if David had ceased to exist. David retreated to a quiet corner by the door, trying to stay invisible, but what he heard next turned his stomach. I don't care what the market research says, Marcus was saying, his tone razor sharp. We're moving forward with strategy 1. If customers don't like it, they can go elsewhere. A silver-haired woman across the table shifted uncomfortably. David recognized her. Sarah Kim, a senior analyst with 2 decades of tenure. Her voice was steady, but hesitant. Mr. Holloway, I've run the numbers several times. We really should consider. I didn't ask for your opinion, Sarah. I asked for implementation. The room froze. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee, and David could feel her embarrassment like a ripple of heat. Unless, Marcus added, eyes narrowing, you're questioning my judgment. Sarah dropped her gaze. No, sir. Good. Now, Dave, make 20 copies of these reports, collated, stapled, the copiers on the 19th floor, building directories by the elevators. Marcus handed over a thick stack of papers without even glancing up. Oh, and grab my dry cleaning, tickets on my desk. David took the documents, nodded, and left the room. His mind was a whirlwind of anger and disbelief. In just under an hour, he had witnessed subtle threats, blatant disrespect, and a culture where silence had become the only defense. These weren't isolated incidents. They were systemic. This was a culture crafted by fear and kept alive through intimidation. As he waited for the elevator, his reflection stared back at him in the polished doors. Gone was the confident executive. In his place stood a tired man in a crumpled shirt, haunted by the knowledge that his company, his legacy, had rotted beneath the surface. When the elevator doors closed, David made a silent vow. Marcus Holloway had no idea who he was dealing with, and before the week was out, this entire department would learn a new definition of leadership, one built on respect, not fear. But first, he had copies to make and dry cleaning to pick up. For now, he was just Dave the Temp. By the time he returned to the 23rd floor, the energy had shifted. The conference room buzzed with low murmurs and nervous glances. Through the glass, David saw Marcus pacing, while 7 department heads sat stone-faced, eyes on the documents in front of them. The presence of Sharon Mitchell from corporate finance confirmed it. This wasn't just a department huddle. This was the quarterly review. As CEO, David had been eager to see this meeting unfold. He'd approved significant investments in the department's innovation pipeline. This was supposed to be the moment when vision met execution. Instead, it was a masterclass in manipulation. "Dave," Marcus barked as David entered. "Fresh coffee. The old stuff's cold. And this time, get my espresso right. Double shot, 1 sugar cube." David nodded and rushed back to the break room, every step fueled by a quiet rage. He worked fast, preparing a fresh tray. When he returned, Marcus was mid-monologue. "Let me be crystal clear about our direction," he declared. "We're cutting the R&D budget by 30%. I don't want to hear whining about innovation or competition. The board wants profits." David almost dropped the tray. He had increased that very budget 6 months ago by 40%, backing the department's potential for industry-shifting breakthroughs. Marcus wasn't just ignoring company strategy, he was rewriting it with lies. "Sir." Sarah Kim spoke up again, her voice trembling. "Cutting R&D now puts the Peterson project at risk. That's a $12 million 0-cents account." Driscoll said, "By printing, do we equally cut? By bludgeon? By forced? By ruin?" Driscoll nodded. "The data shows whatever I say it shows," Marcus snapped, slamming his hand on the table. Everyone flinched. David watched in silent horror as Marcus sneered. "You've been here 20 years, Sarah, and you're still an analyst. That should tell you something about the value of your opinions." Around the table, heads lowered. No one dared to defend her. And that, more than Marcus's cruelty, revealed the rot. "As I was saying," Marcus continued smoothly, "we're moving 40% of our development to Bangkok. It's cheaper, faster, and they don't waste time second-guessing orders." Tom Bradley, the senior project manager, looked up sharply. "Marcus, that means laying off at least 15 developers here, people who've been with us over a decade." "And that," Marcus said with a smug grin, "is exactly the kind of dead weight we need to cut." David's hands were steady as he served coffee, but inside, something had snapped. And what happened next would change everything. "Tom," Marcus said smoothly, "you're in charge of managing the transition. I want a list of terminated employees on my desk by Friday. Start with the ones who ask too many questions." David's hand trembled slightly as he set a coffee cup down near Sharon Mitchell. The clink of porcelain against the saucer rang louder than it should have in the tense silence of the conference room. Sharon, head of corporate finance, was scribbling notes with her usual meticulous precision, but the frown lines between her brows deepened with each directive that came out of Marcus's mouth. She knew. David could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just aggressive cutting. This was a blatant violation of company policy, and worse, an ethical collapse unfolding right in front of them. "Marcus," Sharon said carefully, her tone firm but diplomatic, "these budget changes, I need to verify them with HQ. The R&D allocation was approved directly by—" "Sharon," Marcus interrupted with a condescending smile that made David's stomach churn. "I appreciate your diligence, but I've already cleared it with the right people. Trust me, I have connections at the executive level that you don't. The CEO approved these changes personally in a private meeting last week." David's heart froze. He felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Marcus wasn't just lying. He was invoking David's own name as false authority to push through illegal terminations and budget cuts. It was stunning, not just in its brazenness, but in how calculated it was. If this lie had worked once, how many other falsehoods had Marcus hidden behind the CEO's name? How far had the rot spread? "And that's not all," Marcus continued, now clearly savoring his dominance. "Starting next week, we're rolling out a new productivity tracking system. Everyone will log their activities in 15-minute increments, bathroom breaks, coffee refills, personal calls, everything." He smirked. "All entries get reviewed weekly, fall below acceptable productivity standards, and you'll be placed on an immediate improvement plan." A sharp inhale came from across the table. James Peterson, the lead software architect, spoke cautiously. "That sounds like micromanagement. Developers thrive best with creative space and tracking every 15 minutes. James, Marcus interrupted, his voice dripping with mock pity. "This is exactly why we're falling behind. While you're worried about creative freedom, our competitors are eating us alive." He leaned forward like a vulture circling a wounded animal. "Maybe you're just not the right fit for the direction this company is going." James fell silent, his expression stunned. In a single breath, his years of contribution were reduced to a footnote. David could practically hear the internal gears turning. James mentally updating his resume, calculating his exit strategy. David, still quietly performing his role as Dave, kept refilling water glasses, clearing used mugs, but inside his thoughts were on fire. This wasn't management, this was sabotage. This was a man gutting the culture and integrity of an entire department, weaponizing fear and eroding trust. "Any other questions?" Marcus asked, his tone daring anyone to challenge him. No one did. "Good." Meeting adjourned. "Tom? I want those terminations on my desk by Friday. Sharon, I'll send the budget modifications this afternoon. The rest of you, get back to work. Start showing me some real productivity." The department heads rose in slow, reluctant unison, like prisoners headed back to their cells. Sarah Kim moved with visible weight in her step, shoulders curled forward, haunted by her earlier humiliation. Tom Bradley's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack enamel, and James looked hollow, like someone who had already accepted defeat. "Dave," Marcus called as David picked up the empty cups. "Good work today. You finally got the espresso right. Maybe you're trainable after all." "Huh." David forced a thin smile. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway." "Ooh, one more thing," Marcus added, tossing it out like an afterthought. "Schedule one-on-one meetings with each department head this week. Tell them it's for performance evaluations. They'll know what that means." His smirk turned cold. "And Dave, these meetings are confidential. If I hear you've been chatting about anything you've seen or heard, you'll be out the door before you can say temp agency. Are we clear?" Crystal. David carried the tray out of the room, but each step felt heavier than the last. What he had witnessed was no longer simply about bad management. It was an orchestrated campaign of fear, manipulation, and lies. Marcus Holloway wasn't just drunk on power. He was using David's own name to destroy the company from the inside. Why? He had no answers, only a growing resolve. By midday, David had spent hours scheduling the dreaded evaluation meetings, each one landing like a punch to the gut for the employees he delivered the news to. By the time noon rolled around, his soul felt bruised. The weight of everything he now knew pressed down on him like a boulder. The lunchroom was a different world entirely. No suits, no jargon, just microwaved meals, vending machine sandwiches, and hushed voices. Here, away from Marcus' gaze, people finally spoke the truth. David grabbed a sad-looking turkey sandwich and chose a table in the corner, listening without appearing to. At first it was light chatter, weekend plans, kids' recitals, sports scores. But then came the real stories. "I still can't believe what happened to Jenny," whispered Maria Santos, a young junior developer who looked like she'd barely graduated college. She was speaking to Robert Chan, a systems analyst with quiet eyes and a tired voice. "What happened to Jenny?" David asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Maria and Robert froze, eyeing him warily. But then Robert gave a faint nod. "You're the new temp, right, Dave?" "Yeah," David replied. Robert sighed. "Jenny was the temp before you. Sweet kid. Smart. Always the last one to leave. She redid the entire filing system on her own and stayed late helping with reports. Never complained." Maria's voice turned bitter. Then one day Marcus does a random bag search and finds a ream of printer paper, claims she was stealing, fired her on the spot. David's chest tightened. "Printer paper?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. $20 worth, Robert said with disgust. She was crying when they walked her out. Maria leaned in, her voice sharp now. "Marcus instituted random searches for temps and juniors 3 months ago. Claims it's policy. Funny how he's never searched Tom Bradley's briefcase or Sarah Kim's purse. As if summoned by her name, Sarah Kim appeared at their table, lunch tray in trembling hands. The confident woman David had once reviewed in glowing performance reports now looked like a ghost of herself, fragile, unsure, worn down. "Mind if I sit?" she asked softly. And in that moment, David realized this wasn't just about Marcus. It was about everyone who had been silenced, humiliated, and discarded. And it was time someone started listening. "I don't really feel like eating alone today," Sarah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Robert replied without hesitation, shifting his tray to make space. "We were just talking about Jenny." Sarah's face darkened, her composure faltering. "That poor girl," she murmured. "I tried to stand up for her when Marcus accused her of stealing. I told him I'd seen her working late, told him she was clearly dedicated to the job. You know what he said to me?" The table fell silent. Everyone leaned in, bracing for the worst. Dink said maybe I should worry more about my own performance and less about defending thieves. Her voice cracked. Then he asked if I was having memory problems because of my age. Said maybe the stress was getting to me. She blinked hard. "I'm 53. I've been doing financial analysis since before Marcus was out of college. And yet, in that moment, he made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Like my years of experience meant nothing." Under the table, David's hands curled into fists. He fought to keep his tone even. "That's age discrimination. There are laws against that." Maria let out a bitter laugh. "You think HR cares about laws? Marcus has them wrapped around his little finger." She leaned forward, her voice turning sharp. "Did you know he's dating someone in HR? Cynthia Palmer, assistant director. They think it's a secret, but we've all seen them leave together." David stiffened. That piece of information slammed into place like the final puzzle piece. If Marcus had a personal relationship inside HR, it explained everything. Why complaints vanished, why terminations went unchallenged, why Sarah, Jenny, and Derek had been thrown under the bus without a second glance. Robert's voice cut through the tension. "Remember Derek Williams, software engineer, been here 12 years? The one fired for performance issues?" Sarah asked. "That's the story they gave. But Derek told me the truth before they walked him out. He found inconsistencies in the project budgets, money going to vendors nobody had heard of, contracts signed without approval. When he brought it to Marcus, he was told to back off." And then, Maria added, "Suddenly Derek had performance issues. Funny how that works." David's mind spun, connecting dots he wished didn't exist. Financial irregularities, phantom vendors, terminations disguised as incompetence. This wasn't just toxic leadership. It smelled like fraud. "There's more," Sarah said cautiously, glancing around. "I've been tracking department expenses for the quarterly report. Supposedly, we've spent tens of thousands on consultant fees and research partnerships. But I can't find a shred of documentation. No contracts, no deliverables, nothing." "Have you brought it to anyone?" David asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Who would I tell? Marcus controls all the financial reporting for our department, and like Maria said, his reach into HR means any whistleblower becomes a liability. After what happened to Derek, I'm not exactly eager to be the next one with the target on my back." "The saddest part," Robert added, pushing aside his empty tray, "is that this used to be a great place to work. We had innovation challenges, profit sharing, team-building retreats. The CEO, David Chin, he built this company on respect. We weren't just employees. We were valued." Now silence hung in the air like smoke after a fire. "I heard Chin doesn't even know what's happening," Maria said. Marcus tells everyone that he has direct contact with the CEO, claims all these changes came straight from the top. David swallowed the rising bile in his throat. His name, his reputation, was being used as a weapon to silence and crush the very people he had vowed to protect. They thought he had abandoned them, that he had become one of them. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes I wonder if we should all just quit, find someplace else, somewhere that still values experience and loyalty. Robert shook his head slowly. This is our company too. We built it just as much as anyone else did. Why should we have to run? But what choice do we have? Maria's voice cracked with resignation. We're just employees. We don't have any power. David sat in silence, his heart pounding with a mix of rage, sorrow, and resolve. These weren't just grievances. They were revelations. A tapestry of rot woven by a man hiding behind corporate structure and false promises. Tomorrow's performance evaluations would be a massacre if something didn't change. But then, an unexpected opportunity. Marcus had left for a meeting with potential investors, leaving David with a list of menial tasks designed to keep him busy and out of the way. As David tidied Marcus's office, moving files and organizing papers, a single command lingered in his memory. Bring fresh coffee in 15 minutes, perfect espresso. I have a call with Bangkok partners. David nodded at the time, thinking nothing of it, but when 15 minutes passed and Marcus hadn't returned, the office remained empty. The computer, however, was still running. 2 widescreen monitors displayed a sea of open windows, charts, documents, and one application David didn't recognize. A sleek encrypted messaging interface glowed on the left screen. It wasn't company standard. It wasn't supposed to be there. And the visible messages stopped David cold. Package delivered as promised. Client very satisfied with Q3 data. Wire transfer confirmed. Next delivery timeline. Pipeline documentation for Peterson project ready for transfer. Client willing to pay premium. Access confirmed. Target remains unaware. Recommend patience. David set the coffee cup down slowly, his fingers trembling. He knew he should walk away, but the instincts that had once built Meridian from nothing screamed at him to stay. This wasn't just internal misconduct. This was corporate espionage. The Peterson project was Meridian's crown jewel, a game-changing advancement in renewable energy storage. If that data got into a competitor's hands, it would be catastrophic. Billions in investment, years of work, gone. He scanned more of the chat. Phrases like real-time updates, continued access, and security review stood out like blood on snow. How long had this been going on? The sound of footsteps sent David scrambling. He grabbed a stack of papers from the desk just as Marcus burst in, slightly out of breath. Dave, I said 15 minutes. How long have you been in here? David turned with calm precision. Just arrived, Mr. Holloway. Wanted to make sure the coffee was hot. Marcus's eyes flicked to the monitors, and David saw the flicker of fear before the windows were minimized with practiced ease. Good. Now get out. I have confidential calls. Of course, sir. Anything else? Actually, yes. Marcus studied him for a beat too long. Go to IT. Tell them I'm having printer issues. Stay there until they fix it. Might take a while. David leapt with a nod, heart pounding. Marcus was trying to get rid of him. But that order might have just opened a new door. 20 minutes later, David was in the IT support office seated across from Jake Morrison, a senior analyst who had been at Meridian for 6 years. Printer problems, huh? Jake said, smirking. David gave a quiet smile, his eyes already scanning the floor plan behind Jake. Ah, he said, printer problems seems like they never end. But his real mission was just beginning. Jake was hunched over his keyboard, eyes scanning strings of data with practiced ease. That's strange, he muttered, frowning. Marcus's printer shows fully functional. All connections are green, no errors logged. David leaned against the counter, playing it cool. Maybe I misunderstood what he meant. I'm still new. Could have been something else. Jake nodded, shrugging slightly, but David could tell his curiosity was piqued. Multiple windows were open across his dual monitors, network logs, traffic reports, system diagnostics. It was the kind of interface only IT veterans or someone at the top could decipher. As CEO, David instantly recognized what he was looking at, the real-time heartbeat of Meridian's digital ecosystem. He lowered his voice. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Jake paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Shoot. I've been working for Mr. Holloway for a few days now, and some of the things he's having me do just don't feel right. Is that normal around here?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "What kind of things?" David chose his words carefully. "He has me setting up a lot of vendor meetings with companies I've never heard of. Some have names I can't even pronounce. He always insists on handling the communication himself, and he makes sure nothing is recorded on the company calendar." Jake's fingers froze. His posture stiffened. "That's not normal." David continued, cautiously feeding the fire. "He also told me not to mention any of them to anyone. Says they're sensitive negotiations." Jake opened a new window, his eyes scanning lines of code and timestamps. "You know, we've been monitoring some unusual traffic from the Strategic Development Department. Large file transfers, off hours, encrypted connections, going out to unfamiliar servers." David's heart thudded. "That sounds serious." Jake nodded grimly. "Corporate espionage is no joke in this industry. Some companies will pay millions for real-time access to R&D data, especially on something like the Peterson project." He clicked into a heck map of data flow. "Look at this. Every single transfer originates from Marcus's terminal. Always late at night. Weekends. No backups. All routed through what looks like a custom encrypted VPN tunnel. Someone with admin privileges set that up. Intention." David's breath caught in his throat. "Can you tell what was sent?" Jake flipped through folders and logs. Project files, budget reports, internal communications, even client contracts. It's basically everything a competitor would need to leapfrog us. The horror deepened as David stared at the logs. Dates, times, folder. All pieces of Meridian's crown jewel being quietly siphoned off into the void. Jake leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing. "Jake," David said, his voice tight but urgent. "How long would it take you to trace where the files were sent and what's been compromised?" "For a full report? A day or two, but Dave, if what you're implying is true, we're not talking about a security breach. We're talking about criminal fraud, grand theft. This goes straight to corporate security." David hesitated, then leaned closer. "What if I told you someone in management is involved? Someone who could make evidence disappear before it gets reported. Is the evidence real, or is it..." Jake didn't blink. He just stared. "Then we need to be very, very careful about who we trust." An hour later, David left the IT department with a USB drive in his pocket, a preliminary snapshot of betrayal. He and Jake had agreed on a discreet communication method outside company systems. Jake would keep tracking Marcus's digital footprints, but time was running out. Tomorrow. Marcus's performance evaluations were scheduled. Based on everything David had learned, they weren't evaluations at all. They were a cover, a purge, a final step in eliminating every person who might uncover the truth. And David couldn't let that happen. That night, he barely slept. He worked in secret with Jake and Meridian's most trusted corporate security staff, those who had once reported directly to him, those whose loyalty he didn't doubt. They cross-referenced financial logs, network data, and internal comms. What they uncovered in just a few hours was staggering. By morning, David was ready. At 8:45 a.m., the conference room was already full. Employees from strategic development filling every seat, their faces drawn and anxious. Marcus stood confidently at the front of the room, a laptop open beside a visible stack of sealed envelopes. The email he'd sent earlier had read, "Mandatory, all hands departmental restructuring, 9:00 a.m. It was cold, calculated, designed to catch them all off guard. David arrived carrying a box of donuts, still wearing the same bland disguise. Just the temp, just Dave. He stood near the projector screen, quietly watching. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began, his voice sharp and commanding. "I've called this meeting to announce significant structural changes to our department. As you're aware, performance has been underwhelming, and it's time for a serious correction." He picked up the stack of envelopes. Effective immediately, Sarah Kim, Tom Bradley, James Peterson, Robert Chang, and Maria Santos. You are hereby terminated. Gasps erupted. Sarah turned pale. Tom rose to protest, then sat back down, jaw clenched. Maria looked like she might cry. Around them, tension crackled like a storm waiting to break. Marcus raised his voice over the chaos. These decisions were approved at the highest level, including by the CEO himself. That was the moment. David stepped forward and spoke, loud and clear. "Marcus, that's not accurate." Every head turned. The room fell utterly still. Marcus blinked. "Excuse me?" David reached up, peeled the fake name tag off his shirt, and stood tall. "My name isn't Dave. I'm not a temp. I'm David Chin, CEO of Meridian Technologies." The silence that followed was seismic. Faces turned white. Others turned red. Marcus's expression twisted through disbelief, horror, and then naked panic. You can't be..." Marcus stammered. "I hired you myself." "No," David replied. "You hired someone you thought you could manipulate. What you actually did was hand me a front-row seat to your entire operation." David turned to the projector, connected his laptop, and clicked. The screen lit up with the encrypted chat logs. Every employee in the room gasped as the messages scrolled. File transfers, payments, espionage. "For the last 4 months," David said calmly, "your department head has been secretly selling company IP to external clients. Project data, financial records, client strategies, everything." He let the words settle. This wasn't just unethical, it was criminal, and worse, it was done while you, our most valuable people, were misled, harassed, and almost discarded. All eyes were now on Marcus. "This ends today," David said. But it wasn't just a statement. It was the beginning of the reckoning. Marcus instinctively stepped back toward the door, his instincts screaming at him to run. But 2 uniformed security officers silently emerged from the hallway, planting themselves firmly between him and freedom. David clicked to the next slide, his tone calm, almost surgical. "The Peterson project alone was projected to generate over $50 million, 0 cents in revenue," he said. "But thanks to Marcus's activities, our competitors now have access to our full development timeline, engineering blueprints, and technical specifications." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Sarah Kim, her voice steady but sharp, finally spoke. "The mysterious consultants, the budget anomalies I kept flagging, they were part of the cover story, weren't they?" David nodded. "Yes. Marcus fabricated entire vendor relationships to launder payments and justify off-the-books meetings, and anyone who got too close, like Derek Williams, was systematically removed." Tom Bradley, still processing what he had narrowly escaped, held up one of the unopened termination envelopes. So, we were going to be fired, not for underperforming, but because we knew too much. David's eyes locked on Marcus. Those letters were never about performance. They were about silencing witnesses. Marcus's panic finally cracked his voice. You can't prove this. It's all circumstantial. You're destroying my career over speculation. David turned to the final slide. A forensic breakdown of digital traffic, timestamps, file names, IP addresses, bank transfers. Actually, Marcus, we can prove all of it. He held up a thick folder. Bank records confirming over $200,000, 0 cents in payments from 3 competing firms. Server logs showing unauthorized encrypted tunnels used to exfiltrate data. Surveillance footage of you accessing company systems in the middle of the night. The proof isn't circumstantial. It's overwhelming. Marcus paled. Around the room, employees' expressions shifted from disbelief to disgust. Marcus Holloway, David said, his voice ringing with measured authority. You are terminated immediately for corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and internal fraud. You will be escorted from the premises, and our legal team has already filed criminal complaints with federal investigators. Mr. Q Security stepped forward. Marcus stumbled as he backed into them. Wait, I can explain. I can give you names. There are others involved. David's tone turned icy. Save it for your lawyer. As the doors closed behind the disgraced manager, the room descended into silence. The man who had ruled with fear had been unmasked, exposed, not by force, but by truth. David turned back to the stunned faces before him, people who had suffered for months while he remained unaware behind layers of management. His voice softened. Now let's talk about how we rebuild. No one moved. The atmosphere was thick with conflicting emotions, relief, shock, pain, cautious hope. Sarah was the first to speak. Mr. Chin, we thought you knew. We thought you had approved everything Marcus did. David's face fell with quiet remorse. That's why I had to see it for myself. Marcus used my name to validate his cruelty, and I didn't know. That's on me. He walked to the long table and took a seat, not at the head, but among his people. For 3 days I lived under Marcus's rule. I was dismissed, belittled, even yelled at over coffee. But that was just 3 days. You lived it every day, and you endured. Tom shook his head, still stunned. You actually made coffee? For us? I watched him humiliate you. David smiled slightly. I deserved it. That espresso machine is a nightmare. But more than that, I learned what it feels like to have no voice in your own company, and I'll never forget that. Maria, young and shaken but brave, raised her hand. So, what now? Are we safe? David's expression turned firm. Not only are you safe, every single person on Marcus's termination list will receive immediate promotions and salary adjustments. Your loyalty to each other and to the company, under impossible conditions, was extraordinary. The exhale that followed was almost spiritual. Some eyes welled with tears. But that's not all, David continued. Effective immediately, we're implementing a transparent HR pipeline. Every department will have direct access to corporate HR and a secure, anonymous reporting system. No more silencing complaints, no more abuse from behind closed doors. Robert leaned forward. What about the damage? The stolen files? The lost edge? David nodded solemnly. Yes, we've lost data. But what we haven't lost is the soul of this company. You. Projects can be rebuilt. Innovation can recover. But the people behind it, you're irreplaceable. He stood, walked over to the modest coffee station in the corner, and began pouring fresh coffee. Real coffee, not espresso, not some test of worth. One by one, he handed cups to his employees. "This may seem like a small thing," he said gently, "but 3 days ago coffee was used to demean and control. Today, it's meant to show you what leadership should really look like." When every person had a cup in hand, David raised his own. "I also owe you all an apology. As CEO, I was too focused on expansion, strategy, meetings in boardrooms. I took my eye off the heart of the company. You. That will never happen again." Linda, the seasoned veteran who had once shown him how to work the espresso machine, spoke up. "Mr. Chin, Marcus was good at hiding. You couldn't have known." "That's the problem," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have known. A leader should know. That's why, moving forward, I'll be making regular unannounced visits across departments, not to inspect, but to understand." James, the developer once reprimanded for speaking up, studied him. "So, being Dave the Temp, that was real." David chuckled. "The most educational 3 days of my life. I learned more about leadership by being powerless than I ever did in business school." He looked at them all, faces once strained with fear, now filled with cautious hope. Great companies aren't built by policies, they're built by people, and people thrive when they're treated with dignity. We lost that for a while, but today we reclaim it. Then David reached over, grabbed the stack of termination letters Marcus had prepared, and tore them in half, slowly, deliberately. The room burst into quiet, cathartic applause. These represent the end of a painful chapter, but more importantly, the beginning of a better one. As the meeting wrapped, employees filed out, some shaking his hand, others whispering heartfelt thanks. For the first time in months, they left with lighter steps. Sarah lingered. "Mr. Chin," she said softly, "watching you serve coffee today, it meant more than any policy or raise. It showed us who you really are." David smiled and gathered the empty cups, a task that now felt sacred, not subservient. "Thank you, Sarah. Now let's get to work. We've got a company to rebuild." As he walked out into the hallway, no longer as the CEO above, but as a man among his people, David understood something that would stay with him forever. The best leaders aren't the ones who demand to be served. They're the ones who serve first. And sometimes the most powerful lessons begin with a simple cup of coffee.